Imagine you are applying for this like highly coveted job as an executive chef, right? Like at a Michelin star restaurant.
Oh, wow. That sounds incredibly stressful.
Right. So you walk into the kitchen, you tie your apron, and you're getting ready to cook.
Hmm.
But instead of handing you a knife and pointing you toward the stove, the hiring manager hands you a number 2 pencil.
Wait, pencil?
Yeah, a pencil and a Scantron sheet. And they basically want you to fill in multiple choice bubbles about, the chemical properties of flour and the history of the sauté pan.
I mean, you would probably just laugh in their face.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
totally absurd.
Yeah.
Yet, if you look closely at how we actually operate in society, that is exactly how we measure human potential and track behavior every single day.
Oh, completely. It's wild.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, brought to you by Research Union Insights.
Yeah.
Today, we are looking at a stack of sources that, honestly, at first glance, seems like a massive administrative error.
It genuinely does. It looks like two entirely different research folders just got dropped into the same binder by mistake. Yeah, because on one hand, you have these deeply academic guidelines on educational assessment. We've got stuff from the teaching centers at the University of Connecticut, Indiana University, Bloomington, plus this really great piece from Edutopia.
Right, so it's all about pedagogy and classroom measurement.
Exactly. But then, sitting right next to it in the pile, is a highly technical, really granular breakdown of web cookies and how browsers track digital data.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the connective tissue here is actually really profound. Our mission for you today is to explore how we track, how we authenticate, and how we measure human behavior and knowledge.
Regardless of the setting, right?
Yes, exactly. Whether you are in a digital ecosystem or a physical classroom, it's all the same. The core problem websites face is essentially the exact same problem teachers and managers face.
Which is, how do you know what someone actually knows, and how do you prove they are who they say they are? If we connect this to the bigger picture, the parallel is really unavoidable. I mean, a website tracking your digital footprint to understand your purchasing intent is fundamentally doing the exact same thing as a teacher tracking your learning to understand your mastery of a subject.
Right. We are just a society obsessed with data, with assessment and tracking performance.
Totally. But the foundational question we have to grapple with across all these sources is whether our measurements are actually tethered to reality. Like, are we measuring actual capability, or are we just counting superficial inputs because they happen to be easy to count?
That is the central tension right there. And I want to start on the digital side, looking at the Yukon source material on web cookies, because most of us interact with this daily.
Oh, yeah, constantly.
We see the pop-up, we click accept all just to get it out of the way, and we move on without a second thought.
Just trying to read an article, and you're like, yes, fine, take my data.
Exactly. But the technical reality of why cookies even exist explains so much about how we track behavior. Because the internet, fundamentally, has amnesia. The HTTP protocol is what they call stateless.
Right, which basically means every single time you click a link, the website forgets who you are. It's completely blank.
Yes. You could log in on the homepage, click over to your account settings, and the server treats you like a brand new visitor who just arrived.
So the cookie was basically invented to solve that exact amnesia problem. It forces your browser to hold a tiny piece of data, sort of like a little digital ID card.
And hand it back to the server with every single click.
Exactly. The Yukon text actually breaks down the architecture of how this is implemented. And it starts with the difference between session cookies versus persistent cookies.
And rather than just viewing them as different files, I think it's helpful to look at them as different types of memory.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right. So a session cookie is strict short-term memory. You log into your bank, it holds that session ID while you transfer funds, and the absolute millisecond you close your browser, that cookie is just destroyed.
Poof. Gone.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But a persistent cookie is long-term memory. It actually gets written to your hard drive with a very specific expiration date.
Right. And that's the mechanism that allows a retail site to remember your dark mode preference or keep items in your shopping cart, even if you close your laptop and don't come back for like 2 weeks.
And the distinction gets even more critical when we look at first-party versus third-party cookies, because first-party cookies are set directly by the domain you typed into your address bar.
So if you visit a weather website, it drops a cookie to remember your zip code so you don't have to type it in tomorrow. It's a direct functional relationship between you and the server that you actually requested.
But Third-party cookies operate entirely behind the scenes.
Yeah, they are a whole different beast. These are set by completely different domains embedded on the site you're visiting, usually advertisers or data brokers.
Right. They are the mechanisms tracking your movement across a dozen totally unrelated websites to build a comprehensive behavioral profile on you.
And the data they are gathering falls into very specific buckets. The source text highlights authentication and analytics as the two main ones.
So authentication cookies are doing exactly what the name implies, right? Verifying identity. When you log in, the server generates this unique encrypted session ID. It doesn't send your actual password back and forth over the network.
Because that would be a massive security risk.
Huge. It just sends this unique token to your browser.
And it proves to the server that you have already passed the security check, which grants you continuous access as you navigate through the site's pages.
Right. It is basically the digital equivalent of getting a wristband at a music festival. You stand in line, you show your ticket, and they give you a neon wristband.
Right. And from that point on, you can walk to the merchandise tent, you can go to the food trucks, whatever.
Yeah, and you don't have to pull your ticket out of your pocket every single time you cross into a new area. The wristband authenticates your right to be there.
That's a perfect analogy. But then you have analytics cookies, which are completely different. They aren't verifying your identity at all. They are strictly logging your behavior.
Yes, and they capture just a massive volume of telemetry. Like which specific page did you land on? How many seconds did you dwell there? Did you actually scroll to the bottom?
What was your bounce rate? Meaning, did you arrive and instantly leave without clicking anything else? They map your entire click path.
It's an extraordinary amount of behavioral tracking designed to infer your intent. And honestly, reading the breakdown of how analytics cookies function is what triggered the analogy for me regarding the other half of our sources.
Oh, really? What do you mean?
Well, an analytics cookie functions almost exactly like a traditional multiple-choice standardized test in a classroom.
Oh, wow. That is a fascinating parallel. Expand on that a bit.
Think about what the analytics data actually represents, right?
Yeah.
It tracks the what and the where. It notes that you clicked link A, spent 12 seconds on page B, and bounced from page C.
Okay. Yeah.
It is tracking purely superficial inputs. And a multiple choice test does the exact same thing. It just notes that you chose bubble B instead of bubble C. It is a discrete, shallow data point.
Right.
But neither the tracking cookie nor the Scantron sheet can capture the deep underlying why. Like the analytics cookie has absolutely no idea why you spent 12 seconds on that page.
Right. Maybe you were reading a paragraph intently, or maybe your doorbell rang and you just walked away from your computer.
Exactly. The data point looks completely identical in the server logs. Just like a standardized test cannot prove you grasp the nuanced real-world context of a subject.
Yeah, it simply proves you retained a specific fact long enough to fill in a bubble with a pencil. The limitation of that data is actually quite severe. It possesses what researchers call face validity. Like it looks like a hard, objective, undeniable metric. But it can be entirely misleading regarding someone's actual mastery or their true intent.
And the Yukon source points out that you can, of course, opt out of this digital tracking. Like, if you are tired of the superficial data collection, you can go into Chrome's privacy and security settings and block third-party cookies.
Or in Firefox, you can use strict tracking protection. Safari allows you to block all cookies outright in the Preferences menu.
Right. But the caveat here, however, is that if you go nuclear and disable all cookies, you fundamentally break the website's functionality.
Yeah, you can't log in. Your cart empties on every single click. The entire digital experience just shatters.
Which creates such a fascinating parallel in the physical world. If going nuclear on cookies breaks the website, going nuclear on standardized testing breaks the educational system.
Because you cannot just delete assessments entirely.
Exactly. We still desperately need a way to authenticate what someone actually knows and what they are capable of doing. But if we abandon the multiple choice bubbles, how do we prove someone has the required skills?
And this is exactly where we cross the bridge into the pedagogy sources, specifically the concept of authentic assessment.
Yes, let's get into this.
Because if an authentication cookie verifies a digital login, authentic assessment is the framework we use to authenticate actual, usable human skill. It's basically the antidote to the Scantron sheet.
Right, and the Edutopia piece features this veteran teacher named Sandy Middlestead. She taught in a health careers academy, and she realized very quickly that her students could memorize complex medical terminology perfectly for Friday quiz.
Sure, just rote memorization.
Right, but you put them in a room with a simulated patient, and they froze. The vocabulary just didn't translate to actual application.
Mm.
And she used an analogy that I honestly haven't stopped thinking about, the Johnny Damon analogy.
Right, the baseball center fielder.
Yes. Middlestead argues that giving students a traditional multiple-choice test to assess their capability is like assessing Johnny Damon's skills by making him sit at a desk and fill out a worksheet about the rules of baseball.
I mean, the absurdity of it becomes glaringly obvious when you map it to physical performance like that.
It really does.
A worksheet might reveal if he memorized the distance between the bases or, the dictionary definition of a balk. But a worksheet cannot tell you if he actually possesses the hand-eye coordination to hit a 95-mile-per-hour fastball
Right.
or the spatial awareness to track a fly ball over his shoulder while running at full speed. The worksheet only measures recall. It completely ignores execution.
And the Indiana University Bloomington source grounds this conceptually by highlighting the work of Grant Wiggins. Back in 1998, Wiggins established a framework defining the criteria for what makes a task truly authentic.
What's fascinating here is that the core tenet is that authentic tasks are inherently messy.
Yeah, they aren't sanitized at all.
Exactly. They replicate the realistic, complex environments where adults are actually tested out in the workplace or in civic life. They require human judgment and innovation. They force real inquiry.
Which is so different from standard testing.
Right. If you look at Bloom's taxonomy, which is a way to categorize the cognitive levels of learning traditions, almost universally sit at the very bottom.
Just remembering and understanding.
Yeah, you are just retrieving information. But authentic assessments force the learner to the highest tiers of the taxonomy, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating.
You have to synthesize the information to solve a problem that doesn't have a single predetermined answer.
Exactly.
Though, I have to admit, reading the Yukon guidelines brought up a major point of cognitive dissonance for me.
Oh, how so?
Well, for decades, the ultimate sin in education has been teaching to the test.
Right.
Like, it is universally criticized because it implies you are just drilling students on test-taking strategies and memorization rather than giving them a holistic education.
Yeah.
But the Yukon text actively advocates for teaching to the test here.
I know, it sounds crazy, but it requires a complete paradigm shift in how we view the word test.
Okay, explain that.
In traditional standardized testing, teaching to the test is detrimental because the test itself is an artificial construct. You are just teaching students how to beat a contrived format.
Right.
But in authentic assessment, instructors are actively encouraged to teach to the test because the test is the actual real-world task you want them to master.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
If the test is literally diagnose this patient or troubleshoot this engine failure, you absolutely want them practicing the test.
Exactly. The practice and the assessment become completely indistinguishable.
Which brings us to the actual toolkit. Like, how are institutions implementing this practically? Because the Indiana University text provided some phenomenal concrete examples that honestly offer a blueprint for anyone trying to measure capability.
The adaptability of these examples is what really struck me.
Right. Like in a nursing program, an authentic assessment isn't just a vocabulary matching quiz on respiratory diseases. The assessment is handing the student a multi-page, complex case study of a patient with intersecting symptoms and requiring them to create a comprehensive plan of care.
And in a business program, they aren't just defining market elasticity on a whiteboard. They are developing a complete, viable marketing and sales plan for a real company.
Or in history. Rather than memorizing dates of treaties, students role-play a specific historical event. The instructor then introduces a new variable like changing one decision made by a historical figure, and the students must analyze how the subsequent historical timeline shifts based on that single alteration.
That level of assessment demands such a synthesized, deeply internalized understanding of the material. I mean, you cannot fake your way through that with flashcard memorization.
No way. You'd completely crash and burn.
And the IUB text highlights specific innovators applying this methodology right now. Professor Joshua Danish in the School of Education is a prime example.
Oh, his approach was wild.
Yeah. Instead of having his students write traditional essays summarizing the cognitive theories of Piaget or Vygotsky, he places them in a position where they must observe actual children behaving in a classroom environment.
Which is chaotic.
So chaotic. And they then have to apply those dense cognitive theories in real time to interpret the unpredictable actions of those kids.
The cognitive load required for that is just immense, because a textbook gives you clean, perfectly categorized examples of a theory.
Real children do not act like textbook examples.
Exactly. Forcing the students to bridge the gap between academic theory and messy reality is the true test of their understanding. And then there's Professor Awia Omar, who teaches the Swahili language.
Oh, her approach is deeply compelling.
It really is. She completely bypasses standard grammar translation tests. Instead, she evaluates her students through storytelling.
Which is brilliant.
Because storytelling is a deeply embedded cultural activity within African traditions. The language is alive. It relies on cadence, cultural context, and interactive response. By testing them through storytelling, she assesses them in a context that is authentic to how the language actually breathes in the real world.
Right. It is the difference between analyzing the mechanics of language and actually performing the language.
Exactly.
But, this raises an important question about how we typically gather data in professional environments, too. Because if we want to assess a team's proficiency or gauge the success of a training program in the corporate world, our default move is almost always to send out a survey.
Right. We run a focus group or we conduct exit interviews.
Yeah. And the Yukon text categorizes those under indirect assessment techniques, and they really lay out the structural flaws with relying on them.
Because surveys and interviews are incredibly flexible. They're cheap to administer, they scale beautifully, and they possess that same face validity we talked about with web cookies.
Yeah.
If you ask a direct question on a survey, the data you get back feels like a direct, actionable answer.
But the text is explicit about the fundamental limitation here. It is only indirect evidence of learning or capability.
Right.
The stark reality is that what people say they do, or what they believe they know, is very often wildly inconsistent with what they actually do or actually know.
So here is how I process that gap. An indirect assessment, like a survey, is basically the equivalent of me handing you a questionnaire and asking you to rate your confidence in the kitchen on a scale of 1 to 10.
Okay.
You might circle 9. You might genuinely, in your heart of hearts, believe you are a 9. But an authentic assessment is me handing you a bag of flour, some butter, and eggs, and telling you to bake me a cake right now.
Wow. Yeah, the survey only measures the perception of skill. The cake is the only metric that measures the reality of the skill. If you rely purely on the survey, you can arrive at some really dangerous conclusions. You might promote someone based on their self-reported confidence, only to discover later they lack the fundamental ability to execute the job.
Or focus groups, right. They could be entirely derailed by just one charismatic, loud participant dominating the conversation.
Totally. And interviews can just end up testing a candidate's charisma rather than their actual technical competence. These indirect methods are valuable for gathering sentiment and opinion, sure, but they do not authenticate capability.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. When you lay out the arguments for authentic assessment, the depth of understanding it requires, the realism, the undeniable proof of capability, it sounds flawless.
Right.
It sounds like the only ethical, logical way we should ever measure human potential. So the obvious question is, why isn't everything assessed this way? Why are we still handing out Scantrons?
Because the logistical reality of authentic assessment is brutal. I mean, the Edutopia source does not sugarcoat this at all.
Not even a little bit.
Sandy Middlestead acknowledges that authentic assessment is significantly harder to design, and it is exponentially less efficient to execute than conventional testing.
It is just a massive scaling problem. You can run 1,000 multiple-choice answer sheets through an optical scanner in 10 minutes, and the machine spits out a clean, statistically perfect spreadsheet.
But you cannot grade 1,000 custom-built business plans in 10 minutes.
No way.
It demands an enormous investment of time from the evaluator. It requires careful, nuanced thought. And it requires a willingness to embrace ambiguity, because in an authentic task, there is rarely a single perfectly correct answer.
Right. There are multiple pathways to success.
And the evaluator has to be capable of judging the validity of all those different approaches.
Fortunately, though, both Yukon and Edutopia synthesize a framework for how to actually implement this successfully. Whether you are an educator, corporate trainer onboarding new staff, or just someone trying to structure your own self-learning.
Yeah, and the absolute first step they agree on is design backwards.
Which is so counterintuitive.
It is. Backward design is crucial because our instinct is usually the exact opposite. We usually start by designing an activity. We think, oh, it would be fun to have them do X.
Right.
But backward design forces you to start with the terminal objective. Like, what specific observable action should this person be able to perform when this process is complete?
Right. And once you have rigidly defined that end goal, you work backward to design the assessment that proves it. And only then do you design the learning experience required to get them there.
Exactly. Now, the second step is to break it down, because real-world tasks are inherently overwhelming.
Oh, completely. If your authentic assessment for a coding bootcamp is build a fully functioning iOS application, you cannot just drop that on a novice's desk on week one.
No, the cognitive overload will crush them immediately.
You have to build scaffolding,
Yeah.
to break that massive real-world project into smaller, manageable chunks or benchmarks that eventually build toward the final performance.
And then the third step, which is arguably the most vital for ensuring the process remains fair and transparent, is the use of rubrics.
Yes, the rubrics.
Because authentic tasks are subjective and lack a single right answer, you must construct a detailed scoring rubric that explicitly defines the traits being evaluated. Like, what does a poor performance look like? What does an acceptable performance look like? What constitutes excellence?
Right.
And crucially, the text insists that this rubric must be shared with the learners in advance.
Which ties right back into the philosophy of teaching to the test, right?
Yeah.
You are giving them the answers because the task requires original thought, but you are making the rules of the game completely explicit.
You are removing the mystery of what success looks like.
Exactly. And the Yukon guidelines add a final piece to the puzzle that is so often overlooked: the necessity of reflection.
Yes. Following an authentic task, requiring the individual to reflect on their own performance really helps solidify the learning.
It forces them to analyze their own problem-solving process, and it provides the evaluator with insight into where the friction points were. It basically closes the cognitive loop.
I think it's also really important to point out that the source material doesn't frame this as some zero-sum war between the two methods. Standardized tracking and authentic assessment don't have to be mutually exclusive.
No, not at all.
They often function best as a sequence.
Yeah, the Yukon text uses the medical field to illustrate this beautifully. Because if you have a medical student, you might actually start with the traditional multiple choice assessment.
Right, because you need to prove that they have successfully memorized the symptoms of a specific cardiovascular condition. That baseline recall is just non-negotiable.
Right. But that traditional test is just the prerequisite. Then you deploy the authentic assessment. You take them on clinical rounds, put them in front of a living, breathing patient presenting with those symptoms, and require them to formulate a treatment plan.
The traditional test verifies that the knowledge has been acquired. The authentic assessment verifies that the knowledge can be mobilized under pressure.
Yes, exactly. So bringing all of this source material home for you listening right now, whether you are leading a department at work, conducting interviews for a new hire, or even just trying to teach yourself a complex new skill.
You really have to interrogate how you are measuring progress.
Are you leaning on the digital cookies of life? Are you tracking superficial inputs, counting the minutes someone sits at a desk, and relying on surveys that ask people to self-report their competence?
Or are you building a framework that demands authentic performance? Are you asking them to step into the kitchen and bake the cake?
Think about the single most critical skill you rely on in your profession today. If you had to construct a rubric to authentically assess your own mastery of that skill right now, and multiple choice questions were completely banned, what would that real-world trial actually look like?
What would be the undeniable proof of your capability?
And perhaps the more unsettling question to sit with, would you pass your own test?
Because if we are serious about understanding human potential, we have to look past the convenience of the digital footprint and the comfort of the multiple choice bubble. We have to look at what people can actually build, synthesize, and solve when the variables are unpredictable and the environment is real.
It is infinitely harder to measure, but it is the only measurement that truly matters. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.